And it is Wednesday, July 30th, the 20 at 8 the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8:01 a.m. and I'm a minute late because of a little thing that happened. It was 7:59 and Holly texted me, "Where are you?" And I texted Holly back, "I'm in the studio, where are you?" And I realized that one of us was in the wrong studio. And then I realized that it was me. And so I quickly left the studio that I was in, which is the studio in which I record ads for Lawfare. And I joined the studio that Holly was in and that all of you were in, and all was well. But as a result, we are 1 minute late. The Cactus, as you can see, went on mission last night to Riga, Latvia, where the famous picture of Vladimir Putin hangs outside the Russian embassy. And he made an appearance just so that he wore a little bow for those of you who think he never dresses up. And he was and then he quickly flew back. So the Cactus was out on mission last night.
Which cactus, though? That's the
No,
question.
the Cactus, which is to say
This
the
is
one.
the original cactus who's now silent.
No. He's dead and was reincarnated. The Cactus is, I think Holly has frozen. But yeah, the Cactus is, there is only one cactus. There's, for somebody who was raised in Christianity, your understanding of Trinitarian cactuses is really limited, Holly. Um,
Okay.
you got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Cactus and the Snowman, and one of them jetted off to Riga and appeared,
Which I did.
with a proof of life. You went to Kenya.
Back.
You can't complain. Anyway, it is 8:03 a.m. because we have squandered 3 minutes with this inanity. The sun is shining. It is brutally hot. I'm going to go to New York today, and it's going to be a great freaking day. And what do we say, Mr. Cactus? It is Dog Shirt TV, and Holly did it just beautifully. And it is a forking revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that the cactuses keep proliferating and have somehow managed to get to Riga and go on mission there. And another one of the revolutionary features is that our guest shows up magically right at the moment. This is kind of perfect because if we had to explain the monologue and dialogue that we just had to the guest, it would be
it would be so confusing.
It would be so confusing for everybody. And so just to have the guest magic himself in from Texas right at the right time when no explanation is required. Holly, why don't you introduce Deece?
Yes. Well, first of all, Ben got me a new microphone that he dropped off last night. And I'm wondering, like, is it working? Like, do I sound good? Do I sound really good, Ben?
You sound fabulous, but
it's in a mug.
But don't ask me. We should ask the Greek chorus, because that is useful. So, people, how does Holly sounds? Tom says it does sound good.
I feel like my voice is so loud that with a microphone it could burst eardrums. So I'm a little concerned. I'll try
Well,
to
that's
speak.
why we have gain control on the microphones, and we have
Oh, should
all
I turn
kind.
it down?
No, 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 you sound
Okay.
fabulous. Um,
Okay.
so, and
Okay.
you'll see that the Greek chorus is validating the sound of Holly here. So, you should trust me on microphones. Here is one that is a kind of fabulous thing. I got Holly one just like it. She has stuck it in a mug because she doesn't have one of these arm things. Uh, we're gonna get her
I'm not a
that.
professional yet. So
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
no,
Um,
I bought a stand, but it's not like your stand. But anyway, let's dispense with microphone talk and introduce Deece, who I've actually never met in real life, but I feel like I know him.
and
Deece,
he's got a cactus in back of him, which it could not be more
I
thematically appropriate.
That's amazing. That's because Deece is in the land of cacti, in West Texas. So this is Deece Eckstein. Eckstein or Eckstein?
Xine.
Eckstein. See, I've never even spoken to him. And he is, first of all, the author of a great Substack called Life Its Own Self, and on which he speaks a lot about Texas government and politics because he spent decades working in the Texas state legislature, including for the legendary Ann Richards, and is a longtime observer and analyst of all things Texas politics and government. So I wanted to bring him on because Texas has been in the news a lot lately, and I feel like it's going to be in the news a lot more approaching the midterms and the next election. So, Deece, but we're going to start sort of micro with certain issues, and then we're going to build up to the macro question of what is wrong with Texas and what hope is there? But we'll get to that. Let's start. Let's start with first of all the tragic flooding, which just heartbreaking for all of us, especially all of those children that were killed in the flooding. Obviously, this is a story of natural disaster and probably climate change. But tell us, is there a political dimension to the story? Is there a governmental issue behind the story?
Yes, of course. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
We hear you just fine.
Let me just start by pointing out the fact that in view of the conversation you have had over the last several episodes about cactus and cacti, I thought I would just try to share with you an actual cactus from West Texas so that you would have an idea what an actual cactus looks like.
Are
Is
you
it sing and dance?
suggesting that the cactus that speaks and has eyes and dances is not a real cactus? I mean, I don't come on your Substack and
Yeah.
insult you.
But I am suggesting that, and I do that with the respect that is due to such an august occasion, even though it isn't August yet.
Yeah.
So,
Fair enough.
welcome.
I think showing up with a real cactus is second only to showing up with a dog shirt, and I have a lot of respect for it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. High respect.
And greetings from the magical Trans-Pecos region of Texas. I'm out here north of the Big Bend, and I'm
Love Big
very
Bend.
delighted to be on the show. I've been a big fan, Ben, of yours and of Holly's ever since I came across them due to the magic of Substack. So,
Wow.
here we
Well,
are.
thank you. It's great to meet you.
Thank you.
The magic of Substack has not connected me to your Substack, so it seems to be one-way magic so far. But now Holly has, and I will come into the light.
There you go. Well, let's talk about the Kerrville floods, which of course were very tragic. As I wrote my Substack, I actually spent a lot of summers out in the Kerrville area as a camp counselor. I was very familiar with all those camps, particularly Camp Mystic, that got battered so hard by the thing. And the question Holly asked is there a political dimension to all this? And of course there is. There is a now very well documented story that for over a decade, the Kerr County Commissioners Court, and the relevant camps are all in Kerr County, the Kerr County Commissioners Court either failed to come up with the money itself, or in one case actually turned down money from the American Rescue Plan of President Biden, actually turned down a $10 million grant specifically for installing an early warning system along the river, because the Biden administration, as probably we all take for granted on this thing, is full of communists and cannot be trusted to do the right thing. And so I have what I called in my Substack piece, the stupidest people on earth. And let me just give you a couple quotes so you get an idea of what the local situation was in Kerr County. This was a guy who looked like he was in some kind of public uniform, emergency responder or fire chief or something. Now, we don't need these funds here. We've done just fine and we'll get by without them. But you spend the money, you're signing a contract with the devil, and the devil's in the White House. Now, this is actual testimony to the Kerr County Commissioners Court when it was considering accepting a $10 million grant from the American Rescue Plan so that they could improve safety along the river. One person said, "These people are communists. They hate America. They're teaching it in our schools. I don't think we should take any money from the federal government because they can't be trusted." So I just want to suggest that part of the incompetence of the Kerr County Commissioners Court was driven by constituents who just spewed the stupidest stuff on earth, if you don't mind me saying so. And
what was the stated reason? I mean, people will show up at county commission meetings and say all kinds of things. But what was the stated reason by the county commission for turning down the money?
I think they thought that they did not need the money because A, the river would never flood, and B, whatever steps they were taking to prevent the river flood from hurting anybody, they were going to be able to handle it themselves. But they at one point they had estimated the cost at $8 million. They had asked the state for the money. The state didn't give them the money at that time. So the $10.2 million from the feds was actually a godsend, but they turned it down because they thought they had the situation well in hand.
And is there political blowback for that now, or is it just people like you who are going back through the record and saying, wait a minute, this was knowable and known? I know that the governor said that only losers do retroactive second guessing, but what has been the reaction in Kerr County to the memory of this episode, if any? Or are people too focused on the disaster in the here and now?
You've hit the nail on the head. Right now, they're focused on the here and now of the disaster. They have accused anybody who wants to do anything about blame or accountability of politicizing a tragedy, that sort of thing. Perhaps at some point they will begin to actually talk about that and hold people accountable. There is some nice squabbling going on between the city and the county with regards to whether the city could have been better warned. By the time, so if you think about the situation, the geography of the situation, the city of Kerrville itself is about an hour downstream from Camp Mystic, Camp Heart of the Hills, some of the other camps that were hit very hard by the flood. So there is a question now about flood warnings that were ignored or that weren't distributed and so forth, when to give better warning before they hit the town of Kerrville itself, at which it did great damage. But the real issue is the Kerr County emergency managers and the Kerr County commissioners could have done more to protect those camps from the onslaught of the water that just, it was a deluge and it just ruined everything.
Yeah, Deece, this whole thing reminds me of when the Obamacare, the ACA, was passed, and Texas is one of the few states who turned down the federal funding for the Medicaid expansion. Even many other very conservative states did expand Medicaid. Of course, now that's another whole issue. What's going on now? But I do think that Texas has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country as a result of that. So this seems to be deep in like the Texas psyche of, anti-federal government, but also speak a little bit too about the regulation piece of it. And I've read some, I think maybe even in your piece, you mentioned, building regulations about, and the camps were really built in a flood zone that probably shouldn't have been approved.
Well, the story is now emerging, and I think some of the national outlets have talked about it, that some of the bunkhouses at Camp Mystic specifically were built in what's called the floodway. And that's the area that anytime the river floods is going to be underwater. So you have what you call the 100-year flood, you have the 50-year flood, but the floodway is pretty much, we had a good rainfall last night and the river's going to be up and there it is. So they got exemptions from FEMA because the floodway location of their bunkhouses was, contrary to FEMA guidelines and all that. And so they actually got exemptions from FEMA and from the Kerr County Commissioners Court to be able to build the cabins in that floodway. And that's just part of the problem of what happened. These camps were run by very wealthy people. They were for-profit camps. The tuition at the camps was on the order of $4,000 or $5,000 for 3 or 4 weeks. So these were wealthy camps, and they had more and more campers every year. Part of the boom of, I think I wrote that Kerr County went from having, 20,000 people to 59,000 people over the course of 3 or 4 decades. And some of that growth, of course, was the expansion of the camps along the way, where they did think we can build more bunkhouses, we can accommodate more campers. And so I think I'm trying to answer a specific question about part of why these bunkhouses were in the flood zone. I think the larger question you're asking is, Texas has a long culture of, kind of distrusting the federal government. You're correct in saying that Texas is one of, I believe there's only 8 states left that turned down the Medicaid expansion money that was offered, which included a 90-10 match from the federal government. So for every dollar the state of Texas would have had to invest in expanding its Medicaid pool and expanding the services it offered, it would get $9 from the federal government. And it has been turning that money down almost since the day Obamacare passed. So we're now looking at, Texas has the biggest uninsured population as a percentage of its people. It has the biggest uninsured children population, both in real numbers and in terms of percentage of the state's population. And, it's just a mess. And with the new bill that got passed, the big, beautiful bill that got passed, there's going to be cutbacks in Medicaid services that are going to disproportionately affect rural areas of Texas. We're talking about hospitals closing. We're talking about nursing homes closing. We're talking about people losing access to care. And I think one of the great ironies is that it is rural Texans who provide the margin of victory in elections, both at the state level and in the federal level. But we shoot ourselves in the foot religiously. That's a joke, Holly. Religiously. Never mind.
Well, and that's a piece of it too, right? I mean, it's a very religious state, I would say.
Before you go on, Holly, we are joined by Jonathan Rauch, who reminds us that he is still not a Mormon woman. Um, uh, Jonathan, if you have any questions on Texas floods before we move on, this is the time for them.
I do have a question, and it's occasioned exactly distinguished guest's last comment.
I can barely hear Jonathan.
Yeah, speak up or up your gain. Now you're muted entirely. I'm unmuting you.
Well, while Jonathan figures out a sound, maybe we'll one more. I'll ask Deece another question. Um, so, uh, what is like again the we're getting kind of the my big picture question about Texas again, but do you now I know you worked in state legislature and you we'll come back to Jonathan, I promise. You worked for Ann Richards, the legendary Ann Richards, and obviously Texas has a history of Democrats running the state as well. Now, obviously,
Not a recent history.
That's right.
well, but Ann Richards, like not like Democrats, like segregationists. We don't have to go back that far. Like Ann Richards was pretty liberal, even by our current standards, I would say. Um, you know, in the '90s, that was fairly recent. Um, so how much of like what we're seeing is kind of the current politics, and how much of it is sort of deep within sort of Texas, culture in terms of anti-government and street. I know they're ruggedly independent, Lone Star State, like independent country at one point. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my question. My bigger question is like, how much of this is sort of the recent politics of the last 10, 20 years, and how much of this is like deep in the heart of Texas?
That's a great question, Holly. Texas, I think, has always been a conservative state. And for most of its history, say from after the Civil War until the 1960s, 1970s, it was a completely Democratic state. There was just no point in being a Republican in Texas. I think when George H.W. Bush got elected to Congress, he might have been the first Republican. Well, there was John Tower, whose election was a fluke after Lyndon Johnson ascended to the presidency. But I mean, it was a solid Democratic state. And the war in Texas, the political wars, were between the conservative Democrats and the liberal Democrats. Ann Richards represented the liberal Democrat side of that. And they always got along uneasily with the rest of the Democratic establishment. But what had happened by the mid 1980s was the liberals had taken over all the elected seats in the Democratic Party, which probably contributed to that, in the Civil Rights Act, probably contributed to what were conservative Democrats now migrating over to the Republican Party. And plus you had the suburbanization of the state, plus you had people coming in. So Ann got elected in 1990. It was almost a fluke that she got elected. And in 1994, she was beaten by a young baseball team owner named George W. Bush. And that was the last time we had a Democratic governor in Texas. In 1999, they elected Rick Perry as the lieutenant governor. And that was the end of any statewide Democrats being elected. So we've now had 30 years in which the Republicans have run the state from top to bottom. And
Texas has a lot of statewide elected officials, right? Like 17 or 18 of them.
That's right. I think by the time you have 9 Supreme Court justices, 9 Court of Criminal Appeals justices, so you have 18 right there. And I think there's, if I remember right, there's 11 statewide elected officials by the time you count the railroad commissioner and all that. And that was...
So it's just... And so you have, 20 some odd, 25, 28, 29 statewide elections that have all gone Republican for 30 years.
For 30 years now, right. And originally that was because we wanted a decentralized government. And so you had a governor who was, not really the chief operating officer of the state, because you had a comptroller and you had an agriculture commissioner and you had land commissioner and so forth. What has happened now, in my judgment, is because they have controlled everything for 30 years, they become corrupt. And maybe not corrupt in some bags of money, delivered in the parking lot kind of sense, but corrupt in they're not really accountable to the people of Texas anymore.
Although Ken Paxton is kind of corrupt in the more direct sense
he's corrupt
of the
in
word,
the old-fashioned sense. Right. He is corrupt in the old-fashioned sense. And he's probably the poster child of just how bad it all is, because he's been accused of taking bribes, he's been accused of cheating on his wife, he's been accused of a number of things that would besmirch the reputation of an elected official, but he's happily chugging along, and in fact getting ready to take on John Cornyn in the U.S. Senate race next year. So Paxton really is the poster child of how bad it can get when there is no accountability, when nobody's going to be held to account, when nobody's going to be booted from office just because they're incompetent or corrupt.
Jonathan, is your audio working now? It's still very quiet, but if you yell, and we can probably work with it.
I just wonder about the Mystic situation, if there has been any local political blowback yet, and if there will be. I'm a scholar at Brookings where we do politics, and of course for years we've been struggling to understand why it seems to be that there's no amount of misgovernment that can detach red American voters from the Republican Party, even when that party pursues policies that seem to directly break promises and go against the interest of those voters. So politics there, will there be any blowback, any reconsideration, any change of the guard?
Well, that has yet to be seen, Jonathan. And as I mentioned earlier, Kerr County is a very conservative county. I think it voted for Trump by plus 20 in the 2024 election. It's a very conservative county, and it has a very conservative political culture. The people that spoke up against the money from the American Rescue Plan are still there, and it's unclear to me whether or not there'll be any actual accountability. I just don't know. One of the hallmarks of being so deeply conservative as we are is, as I said, that nobody gets held accountable for anything. And I think that what's happening in Kerr County is a microcosm of what happens in the state, Jonathan.
Now,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Do you accept the conventional wisdom that Texas and California are counterparts, negative images of each other, both corrupt one-party states, but that Texas has managed to govern itself comparatively well compared to California, and thus is growing more strongly and has a brighter future?
I don't know about the first part of it, which is that they're counterpart states. I don't know that Texas governs itself better than California, because Texas is better maybe on business than California is, but we have millions of children who don't have health insurance. We have millions of people who do not have health insurance. We have disasters like this that the state is unprepared for and does not know how to respond to. And so, I think there's a case to be made that Texas is not very well governed, particularly in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hear from my mother in West Texas, in Abilene. My parents live in Abilene. I hear about all the, terrible Californians who are coming from,
Yeah, that's part of the
um,
problem.
yeah, that are coming from. No, she's thinks they're liberal and they're like polluting the state with liberalism, but they're fleeing the horrible regime in California and they're coming to Texas for the deregulated business environment and the cheap, property prices. And then in her mind, she's like she even we saw when I was visiting her once, there was like a road rage incident where someone on the freeway, one of the interstates in Texas, shot another driver, and she was like, "Oh, that's the Californians coming in." And I'm like, "Yeah, because Texans don't have enough guns apparently to shoot each other." But anyway,
Yeah,
um,
a few
yeah,
more
but
guns would always help.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I don't know if you want to comment on the influx of sort of Californians, and is it, but there is an influx. Texas population is growing, and we've thought for a long time that it's growing in more potentially more liberal directions, with sort of urban areas growing and sort of the blue parts of Texas growing in population. And every election cycle, there's great hope that somehow Texas could, turn blue or go in that direction, and yet it doesn't seem to happen. So if you could comment on the influx into Texas and how and why that is or isn't changing things.
I do not have any demographic information to back it up, so I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants and pretend to be an expert for y'all. But I think there has been a big movement of people from California to Texas. I think it is not liberal Californians moving to Texas. It is the conservative. It's sort of like the Cuba situation. The people that fled Cuba were not the conservatives. I'm sorry, we're not the liberals. The people that fled Cuba to Miami were the conservatives, which explains a lot about South Florida politics over the last 50 years. I think there have been, this is maybe going out on a limb, but Californians have ruined Terlingua. I don't know if you all have ever been there, but when I first
unpack that statement for us.
Yeah,
What was Terlingua and what is it now?
Terlingua used to be the end of the earth, and people went to Terlingua in order to hide from the rest of the world, or at least to get off the grid as much as they could. And what's happened in the last decade is a lot of people, I think from California, or a substantial portion of them from California, have moved to Terlingua. What they do is they buy a piece of property, they put a house on the piece of property, and then they put a bunch of yurts or mini houses or tents or whatever on the property. And then they charge people $200 a night to stay in the yurts. And so Terlingua had its kind of moment where it was really the place to go, and everybody wanted to be there and sleep in a yurt. And that is now beginning to die. And Terlingua has a lot of property, a lot of houses on the market now, because I think that got carried away. So I think there's a broader trend, which I cannot quantify.
This is your chance, guys. You start an app, you call it Yurt B&B, and you can rent a yurt per night in Terlingua. They're yurt cheap, guys.
They're yurt cheap, and they're very lovely and modest, and the stars are still beautiful for the time being. So, but it's an example. To me, it's an example of what they call the Californication of Texas. And again, I can't back up what the numbers are, but Texas has become more conservative, not more liberal. So, Holly, your theory that more people equals a more liberal, generally populace and electorate, has not proven true so far, even though certainly the 5, 6, 7 biggest cities are all solidly Democratic in their voting. So it's an interesting phenomenon. Again, a lot of it is sustained by the rural and suburban voters.
So it says on your Substack that you're not from Texas, but got there as soon as you could.
Yes, sir.
Given
I
all
was
that you've
six.
said, given all that you've said, why do you love Texas?
Well, I love the spirit of Texas. I love the opportunity, the sense of opportunity and wide open spaces it provides. I now live in a part of Texas where I can walk outside and see a billion stars every night, and where the countryside is wide open. Um, I love the people of Texas. I think they're good people. I think what we have is this interesting combination of the most big hearted people in the world and the worst state government you could possibly imagine. And I haven't quite reconciled how that happens. But Texas is a great state. The people are great. Um, I just wish we had better government.
Well, speak to the redistricting issue then, and maybe that's sort of a piece of it where this terrible government is seems to be entrenching themselves through redistricting, or maybe that's overblown.
Well, of course, we always gerrymander anytime we get an opportunity. That's, the Democrats were guilty of it back in the day, and the Republicans are guilty of it now. What is going on right now, for those that don't know, is that the Texas legislature is in a special session that was called by the governor specifically at the request of President Trump to redraw to do mid-decade redistricting in the hope of creating 5 more Republican seats in the U.S. Congress. So the current Texas map has 38 seats in it, of which 23 are Republican and 15 are Democratic. I may have that number a little bit wrong, but they are trying to add 5 more Republican seats. They are looking specifically at what are now majority minority districts and trying to figure out if they can carve enough people out of them to turn them from Democratic into Republican seats. We have not seen a map yet, although I am certain there is a map. I think they know what they want to do, but they're now in the process of holding hearings around the state, getting input from people, and there will be a map in a little while. I believe they already have the map. I believe they already know what they want to do, and by they, I mean the Republicans, particularly kind of Republican honchos up in Washington, D.C. They already know where they want to try to pick and choose.
Do you have a sense of, I mean, this kind of thing can really backfire like it did with the Democrats in New York, where you think you're being really clever and you're creating this district that a Democrat should win in Long Island, and then actually it's a little bit too Republican and the Democrats underperform statewide because you've been just a little bit too clever, and you haven't counted on a 1 or 2% swing because of the national political mood. How confident are you that manufacturing a 5 district swing pro-Republican is actually doable here, and that what you're not actually doing is endangering a bunch of Republican incumbents by injecting a bunch of Democratic voters into them by way of diminishing the strength of Democratic incumbents?
Benjamin, I think that's a great question, and I think that is exactly one of the risks that they are doing. Trump has asked for 5 new districts. I'm sure that some map maker somewhere thinks that they can do that. But as you are suggesting, what happens when you draw these maps at the beginning of a decade is you get, say, 25 or 23, whatever it is, districts that are 55 or 56% Republican. A few of them are just completely off the charts, but most of them are, say, 55 or 56. To get 5 more districts, now you have to turn all those districts into 52% Republican districts. And that's what happens, that's where it blows up in your face. And they have done
Right.
that in the past. Democrats, when they were in charge of redistricting, did that in the past, back in the 80s. And Republicans have done that in the 20s and 2010s, where they they gambled that they would be able to hold on to those seats. The whole premise of redistricting is you draw your map, and then you hope that in 10 years you still have those districts. And one of the things that happened in the legislature, in the Texas House during the 2010s, was they had they did the mid-decade redistricting, and then they lost a bunch of those seats by the end of the decade because they had they were trying to cram too many elected officials into too few voters.
Yeah, I mean, people always marvel at how precise you can be now with computer assisted and good data on redistricting. But what you can't do is factor change in political mood.
Right.
That is, if you have if the electorate goes from a kind of R+2 electorate, which is what it was in the presidential race, to a D+3 electorate, you get a big swing, and it actually is a lot of voters, and they're going to be you're going to magnify that effect precisely in the swing districts that you're creating by being effective in the redistricting. And that's why, Democrats are looking so hungrily at those New York districts that they created. And I do, I would say, if I were a Texas Republican, I would be a little bit worried about creating 5 more of those districts out of what are now relatively safe seats.
And
it's one thing if you're heading into a Republican year,
right,
but they shouldn't. I mean, just as a matter of political prudence, you don't assume that the mid-cycle elections 2 years after a Republican is elected president is going to be a big Republican year, unless it's 2004 or something.
One of the conversations that I understand is going on behind the scenes is that Trump has asked for 5 new seats. He obviously has people in Washington who are advising him about that. But there are people in Texas who are saying, I don't think we can get you 5 seats. And I think if we get 5 seats, we can't hold them all the way till the end of the decade. We can't hold them. We might be able to get through 2026, but not through 2028 or 2030. Of course, part of the pushback they're getting is we don't care about 2028 or 2030 because we won't be on the ballot then, and this is not about preserving that is the Trump administration's lead. So that conversation I know is going on among the Republicans in Texas, and we'll see where all that heads when they start actually letting us see maps.
Jonathan?
So will Greg Abbott be governor forever?
I hate to say this, Jonathan, but he will be governor as long as he wants to. And I think if he runs again in 2026, he's up for re-election next year. If he runs again, he will be re-elected.
Are there no term limits? There's no term limits?
No, ma'am, we do not have term limits in Texas. And part of the problem is the Democrats do not have a very well-organized bench or a well-organized statewide party. And so they have a hard time getting somebody across the finish line. No matter who the person is. They had Wendy Davis back in 2014. They had Beto in 2022. I'm trying to remember who ran for governor in 2018. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this way, but poor Lupe Valdez, who was the sheriff of Dallas County, who was completely unknown to everybody in Texas. But they persuaded her to run. on the theory that, oh, she's a Latina and she's law enforcement. Well, how could she miss? But she did miss. So part of the problem here in Texas is the Democrats are a little under strategized, underfunded, under charismatic, whatever you want to call it. They're not talking about James Tallarico, who is a very impressive state representative from the northern edge of Travis County, who went on Joe Rogan last week and kind of made a big impression. And they're not talking to him about, oh, you should run for governor. But you've also got Beto thinking about running for governor again. You got Joaquin Castro. I think there's at least a couple other people who are in that conversation. And I wish well for all the Democrats, but I wish they had more ability to play the ground game and get somebody across the line.
So I want to ask about the apparent lack of fear of retaliation on the redistricting thing. Gavin Newsom has made clear that if Texas goes ahead with a mid-cycle redistricting, he will reopen the districts in California, which has some constitutional hurdles, but probably stuff he can get around. Might have to go to a voter initiative to do it. But why? I mean, there is more space for game playing in California than there is in Texas. Why are Texas Republicans so unafraid of what a bigger state that has more potential for redistricting gains than Texas does? Because California's current maps are written by a nonpartisan redistricting commission. So if you really opened that up and you said, in retaliation for what Texas is doing, we're going to wipe out the Republican Party in congressional districts in California, you could do some real damage to, a lot of Republicans, including prominent Republicans. Why are Texas Republicans so unafraid of that? Is it just that they don't think the Dems have it in them or will really do it? Or is there some reason why they're confident that they can get away with stuff in Texas without triggering this retaliatory action?
That's a great question. I would say part one is this is not a Texas Republican initiative. This is coming out of the Trump White House, and the entire GOP in the United States of America now is in do what dear leader wants mode. And so I think regardless of, Donald Trump's not sitting around with a bunch of redistricting maps and a book full of data saying, I think we can get 5 more seats out of it. So Texas Republicans are largely reacting to what the president wants them to do, and nobody will ever say, well, no, we can't do that, or no, we shouldn't do that. Number two, California does have an independent redistricting commission, and there will be, although it's a doable thing, they will have to figure out a way around, their laws and their constitution and so forth in order to be able to do that. You'll also have the opportunities in Illinois and in New York to do mid-decade redistricting that would favor the Democrats. So back to your question, I think the reason why the Texas Republicans are not particularly worried about that is because they're being told by their dear leader to go ahead and do it anyway. And whether they can get, I think the only pushback they may get is whether they try to get 3 or 4 or 5 seats.
Gotcha.
One of the last topic, if you don't mind, if no one has any other questions about redistricting, I wanted to ask you about abortion in Texas, because here again, Texas has kind of become the poster child of like the worst of the worst. And in fact, I've read that they've stopped publishing maternal mortality
Yes.
data because it's so bad. And my question is here too. To me, so again, I have deep family ties to Texas, mostly very religious ties. So I understand abortion in the religious mindset. But there's again the counter strain and the counter winds on that in Texas are this sort of anti-government, get off my lawn, get out of my life sort of ethos in Texas that this abortion, their abortion policy is very much counter to. So I wonder if do you see any room for like a pushback on that issue or that issue becoming something that could galvanize more centrist voters?
It has not so far. And I think that while Texans generally want the government to keep their hands out of their lives, out of their private lives, out of their private business, abortion has just become an exception to that for modern day Republicans. And so I don't know, I don't know that there's going to be somebody who stands up and says, keep your hands off my body, or at least somebody from that either Republican or the centrist part of the electorate. I do think the risk they are running is that they are, they have this kind of bounty hunter approach. Jonathan Mitchell is a lawyer here in Texas. He's the one that came up with it. They knew that if the state was doing certain things to restrict abortion, that could be held unconstitutional because the Texas law passed before Roe versus Wade was reversed. And so they knew that was a challenge. And what they did was they created this private cause of action where if you are living in Texas and you know that your neighbor had an abortion, you can sue your neighbor in district court to get money damages and to punish the person for getting the abortion. Well, that's kind of a novel thing. And in fact, they're doing it on a couple other things now. But part of that was understanding that the courts would not tolerate some of that at the time. Again, that's before Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. But it seems to me that there is a governing coalition in Texas that believes that abortion should be restricted.
Holly, let's see how loud you are.
Am I terribly loud?
No, you sound great to me.
Well, I tried to turn it all the way. Sorry, I'm messing with my new mic. Apologies to Deece, but I tried to turn it all the way up to see like how because I didn't know where I was in the range, but it just kept going and going and going. So I don't know if it has an endpoint on the volume on this thing, Ben. I'm gonna have to play around with it offline. But anyway,
I'm sorry. Are you telling me that you are so bored with the conversation we're having that you decided
no, I'm
that
getting
you
complaints in the
mess around
chat.
with your mic for 5 minutes in the middle of the thing?
No, because I'm looking at the chat and they're all complaining about me. So I'm having to try to respond to the Greek chorus. They're very demanding.
Well, you sound perfect to me, but I am wearing studio headphones, so so we've got about 5 minutes left. Jonathan has a question.
Well, only if there's time. I just wondered if you're seeing the same kinds of very aggressive immigration enforcement in cities in Texas, and if you're seeing any of the same kinds of blowback that we're seeing in, for example, Los Angeles and some of the blue states and cities.
Great question. The immigration enforcement so far has not been as dramatic in Texas as it has been in Los Angeles, for instance. There have been some immigration raids in Houston, and there is some pushback there from it. Statewide, I don't think there's been a whole lot of drama around the immigration issue. Out here in West Texas, where people really are much more copacetic about immigration and copacetic about the presence of people from Mexico in our lives. There's not a big fuss going on. The government put 500 soldiers here in Brewster County, which is the county Marathon is in, Alpine, and then also some soldiers in Marfa. But they've been maintaining a pretty low profile, and there's not been a lot of public fuss over immigration out here. I think if you started having big immigration raids in a city like San Antonio, you probably would get some real pushback from the people in that community. And you certainly are going to get that to the extent they ramp it up in Houston.
And are they just not doing that because they know this, or because antagonizing? I mean, I've assumed that part of the point of the Los Angeles situation is to antagonize California voters and increase friction in urban areas in blue states. Is the assumption behind your comment that you actually don't want to increase friction with Houston voters because that could have statewide election implications? Or is it something else going on?
No, I do think that's part of it. I just think that politically it doesn't pay off as well as it does out in California or maybe in Chicago. And so, why poke the sleeping bear?
Right.
I imagine economically too. Like, you don't. Again, this is probably the labor force in a lot of communities, and you could really hurt the economy there in Texas if you went hard after illegal immigration.
That would certainly be the case, and I do think that the business community in Texas is much more unified about that sort of sense. And although they're all God-fearing Republicans, they would brace some hell if there was a lot of immigration enforcement in Texas.
So you have the basic compromise is the business community stays with this crew despite its rhetoric, but you don't have a lot of aggressive enforcement in Texas, just as a prudential matter to avoid ruffling feathers.
I think that's right.
It just goes to show you what I mean, not to say that there's no sort of problem of illegal immigration or there's no downside of illegal immigration, but it just goes to show you how contrived this issue is politically. When you have states that are obviously, the border states like Texas, where there's probably some of the highest levels of. I also haven't seen a whole lot in Arizona, which is another state that you would think that they would be doing big raids on, but yet they're not doing it there. They're clearly going after blue communities. They've also been here in the DC area. There have been increasing number of raids that I've seen. I have a friend who's really active in the immigration space here, and again, this is a very blue area here in Northern Virginia and the DC area and Maryland. So it just shows you how contrived and manipulative it is.
Yeah.
We are going to leave it there. I am going to go catch a train to New York. I am assuming that Jonathan will keep trying to become a Mormon woman. Maybe he will succeed by the next time he shows up on Dog Shirt TV. Holly is going to play with her new microphone
and my cacti
and the cacti.
All the cacti.
And Deece, what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. While we have talked, I have subscribed to your Substack, and I am most excited about it. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. I'm going to be in New York and in some hotel lobby or something. I don't know who's going to join us, but it's going to be great, and we're going to have fun. Talk to you later.
Thank you very much.